The sound of shattering glass pierced the air as Sophia Montgomery sent yet another porcelain teacup crashing to the floor of her family's lavish San Francisco mansion. Her trembling hands betraying the carefully composed expression she fought to maintain before her disapproving parents. It was 1878, and at 22 years old, Sophia had just committed what her mother called her 100th social atrocity in front of the Andersons, one of the wealthiest families in California and potential business partners to her father's banking empire. "I simply cannot bear this humiliation any longer," Eleanor Montgomery declared, her voice tight with barely controlled anger as the last of their guests departed with polite, strained smiles. "Your father and I have done everything to raise a proper young lady, and you reward us with this." This constant embarrassment. Sophia stared at the broken fragments scattered across the imported Persian rug, each shard reflecting her own fractured sense of worth. "I apologized, Mother. My hand simply, enough." Her father, Richard Montgomery, stood with his back rigid, every inch the successful banker whose reputation meant everything. "This isn't merely about a teacup, Sophia. It's about your inability to conform to the most basic standards of society. The stammering, the clumsiness, your inappropriate questions about business matters. The Andersons' son was considering a courtship, but after today's display, I dare say that prospect has vanished." Sophia bit her lower lip, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. She had never asked for a courtship with William Anderson, whose conversation was as stimulating as watching paint dry. But saying so would only further inflame her parents' anger. "Perhaps we should reconsider Mrs. Willoughby's suggestion," her mother said quietly to her father, though intentionally loud enough for Sophia to hear. "A few months at her finishing school in Boston might be exactly what Sophia needs." Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, perhaps removing her from society for a time would be best for everyone. The journey east might do her good as well." "I'm standing right here," Sophia said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Please don't discuss me as if I were invisible." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "If only you were, dear. Then perhaps the Hendersons wouldn't have witnessed you spilling wine all over yourself at their gala last month, or the Whitleys wouldn't have heard you questioning the governor about women's suffrage at their dinner party. Matters which are entirely inappropriate for a young lady of your standing," her father added. "Your brother never causes such scenes." Of course Thomas didn't. Her perfect older brother who had seamlessly stepped into his role at the bank, who married the perfect socialite, who never questioned anything about their carefully constructed world. "I've tried, Father. I truly have," Sophia said, the familiar knot of inadequacy tightening in her chest. "But I cannot seem to be the daughter you want." "Evidently not," her mother replied coldly, "which is why decisions must be made on your behalf. You'll depart for Boston next week. Mrs. Willoughby assures me she's had success with even the most hopeless cases." Sophia stood there, feeling the walls of her gilded cage closing in. She had spent years attempting to fit into a mold that seemed designed specifically to exclude someone like her curious, occasionally clumsy, and far more interested in the world of ideas than in the latest fashions or social gossip. That night, long after her parents had retired to their respective bedrooms, Sophia sat at her writing desk, staring at the elegant stationery emblazoned with the Montgomery family crest. Her cousin Abigail had written again from Silver Creek, a small but growing town in Colorado Territory where she had moved after marrying a local businessman 3 years earlier. "Life here is nothing like San Francisco," Abigail had written. "There are challenges, to be sure, but there's a freedom to the West that I never experienced in the city. People are judged more by their character and contributions than by their pedigree or grace at a tea party." Sophia had kept every letter, reading them again and again like treasured novels. Now, faced with being shipped off to a finishing school where they would attempt to sand away every interesting facet of her personality, those letters seemed to offer the only alternative. With trembling fingers, She began to write. Dearest Abigail, I find myself at a crossroads that demands immediate action. 5 days later, Sophia stood on the platform of San Francisco's train station, her parents believing she was boarding a train to Boston under the supervision of Mrs. Peterson, a trusted family friend who would accompany her as far as Chicago. What they didn't know was that Mrs. Peterson, who had always shown Sophia genuine kindness, had agreed to participate in a deception. Are you certain about this? The older woman asked quietly as they stood beside the eastbound train. It's not too late to change your mind. Sophia clutched her small valise, which contained only essential items and the money she had withdrawn from her personal account funds given to her by her grandmother before her passing. I've never been more certain of anything. If I go to Boston, the person I truly am will disappear forever. Mrs. Peterson nodded, her eyes sad but understanding. Then take this. She pressed an envelope into Sophia's gloved hand, a small gift to help you establish yourself. Consider it an early birthday present. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. Thank you for understanding. I was young once too, my dear, different times but similar constraints. She glanced at the clock. Your train to Denver departs from platform 3 in 20 minutes. I'll make sure your parents believe you're safely on your way to Boston. With a quick embrace, they parted ways. Sophia made her way to platform 3, heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. She had never done anything so bold, so completely contrary to her upbringing. Yet with each step toward the westbound train, a strange lightness began to replace her fear. The journey to Denver was long, alternating between breathtaking moments of excitement as she watched the landscape transform from California's golden hills to the rugged mountains of Colorado, and periods of gut-wrenching doubt when she questioned her decision to abandon everything familiar. She spent most of the journey with her nose buried in a book, avoiding conversation with fellow passengers who might ask too many questions. Only when she reached Denver did she allow herself to relax slightly, knowing she was just one short journey away from Silver Creek and the welcoming arms of her cousin. But fate had other plans. When she arrived in Denver, a telegram awaited her. Deeply sorry, stop Abigail, seriously ill with fever, stop doctor, advises no visitors, stop will write, when situation improves, stop Edward Harrington. Sophia read the telegram 3 times, each reading increasing her panic. Her carefully constructed plan was unraveling before it had truly begun. With no accommodations arranged in Denver and limited funds that needed to last until she could find employment, she faced her first real crisis of independence. Miss, are you all right? A station attendant approached, noticing her distress. Composing herself, Sophia nodded. Yes, thank you. I've just received unexpected news. Could you direct me to a respectable hotel nearby? After securing a room at a modest hotel that catered to unmarried female travelers, Sophia spent a restless night weighing her options. Returning to San Francisco was unthinkable. By now, her parents would have discovered her deception, and the consequences would be severe. Waiting in Denver for Abigail's recovery could quickly deplete her funds. The next morning, she made her decision. She would continue to Silver Creek as planned. Even without Abigail's immediate support, the small town offered her best chance at building a new life. Perhaps Edward, Abigail's husband, could still help her find lodging and employment until her cousin recovered. The journey to Silver Creek required a combination of train and stagecoach travel. As the stagecoach bounced along the rutted road, Sophia got her first real taste of frontier life. Her traveling companions included a middle-aged couple returning from visiting relatives in the East, a young minister heading to his first parish, and a gruff older man who said little but watched the passing landscape with sharp eyes. When they stopped to change horses at a way station, Sophia overheard the driver and station manager discussing recent troubles with bandits in the area. Her heart raced as they continued their journey, every unusual sound causing her to start. First time out west, miss." The older man asked, breaking his silence. "Is it that obvious?" Sophia replied with a small smile. "You've got that look about you. City folk always do when they first come out here." He wasn't unkind, merely observant. "What brings you to Silver Creek?" "Not many young ladies travel alone to such places." "I'm visiting my cousin," Sophia said, the half-truth coming easily. "She's lived there for several years now." He nodded. "Good town, Silver Creek, growing fast since the silver strike 2 years back, but still decent folks for the most part." The conversation lapsed, but Sophia felt strangely comforted by the brief exchange. Perhaps people here really did care less about social graces and more about substance. As they crested a hill in the late afternoon, Silver Creek came into view. Unlike the grand buildings of San Francisco, this town consisted mainly of wooden structures stretched along a main street, with houses scattered across the surrounding area. A church steeple rose above the other buildings, and the mountains provided a stunning backdrop to the scene. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of a building marked Silver Creek Hotel and Stage Office. As Sophia descended, the reality of her situation hit her fully. She was alone in a strange town, with only the name of her cousin's husband to guide her. "Miss Montgomery." A voice called out as she collected her valise. She turned to find a thin man with spectacles approaching. "Yes, Edward Harrington." He extended his hand, then seemed to think better of it and gave an awkward bow instead. "I received your telegram saying you were continuing on despite Abigail's illness. I've arranged accommodations for you at the boarding house run by Mrs. Timmons. It's the most respectable establishment for unmarried ladies in town." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington." "How is Abigail?" His face tightened with worry. "The fever broke yesterday, but she remains very weak. The doctor is cautiously optimistic." He glanced around. "I have a buggy waiting. Mrs. Timmons is expecting you, and tomorrow, once you've rested, we can discuss your situation further." Mrs. Timmons proved to be a stern but fair-minded widow in her 50s who ran her boarding house with military precision. The room she provided was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk. After the journey, it seemed like luxury to Sophia. "Breakfast at 7 sharp," Mrs. Timmons informed her. "No gentlemen callers beyond the front parlor and door locked by 9 each evening. I run a respectable house, Miss Montgomery." "I understand completely," Sophia assured her, "and I appreciate you accommodating me on such short notice." That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the distant sounds of the town so different from the city noises she'd known all her life, Sophia felt a curious mixture of terror and exhilaration. She had done it. She had escaped the suffocating expectations of her parents and their social circle. Whatever happened next would be determined by her own choices, her own abilities. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the simple muslin curtains, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from downstairs. Sophia dressed carefully in one of her plainer dresses, conscious that her fashionable San Francisco attire would stand out conspicuously in Silver Creek. At breakfast, she met 2 other boarders, Miss Harriet Wells, a teacher at the local school, and Mrs. Clara Jenkins, a widow who worked as a seamstress. Both women were politely curious about the newcomer, but neither pressed when Sophia kept her background vague. Edward Harrington arrived promptly at 9 to escort her to his office above the town's only bank, where he worked as an accountant. "Abigail asked to see you," he said as they walked along the bustling main street. "But I must warn you, she tires easily." Their modest home was on the outskirts of town, a simple 2-story structure with a small garden that showed signs of careful tending. Inside, everything was neat but plain, so different from the opulence Sophia had grown up with. Abigail lay propped up in bed, her normally rosy complexion alarmingly pale, but her smile when she saw Sophia was genuine. "You actually came. When Edward told me, I could scarcely believe it." Sophia hurried to her side, taking her cousin's thin hand. "Of course I came. Your letters were my lifeline these past years." After assuring Edward she would call if needed, Abigail waited until he left the room before fixing Sophia with a knowing look. "Now, tell me the real reason you've traveled all this way alone." "I know my proper Aunt Alina would never have permitted such a journey unless dire circumstances were involved." So Sophia told her everything: the constant failures to meet her parents' expectations, the finishing school ultimatum, the deception with Mrs. Peterson's help. As she spoke, she saw not judgment in her cousin's eyes but understanding. "You're welcome to stay with us once I'm recovered," Abigail said when Sophia finished. "But I suspect you didn't come all this way to simply exchange one family home for another." Sophia nodded. "I need to support myself to prove I can stand on my own 2 feet. Then we'll find you suitable employment." Abigail's eyes showed concern. "But Sophia, Silver Creek isn't San Francisco. The opportunities for a young woman are limited, teaching perhaps or shop work." "I'm prepared for that," Sophia assured her, though her heart sank slightly. Her education had prepared her for society, not for practical employment. She could play the piano, speak passable French, and recite poetry, none of which seemed particularly useful in a frontier town. As if reading her thoughts, Abigail squeezed her hand. "Don't worry. You're intelligent and determined. Those qualities matter more here than they ever did in San Francisco." Before they could discuss further, Abigail's energy began to flag, and Sophia took her leave, promising to return soon. Outside, Edward was waiting to escort her back to town. "Abigail says you're seeking employment," he said as they walked. "As it happens, Mr. Donovan at the Silver Creek Chronicle is looking for assistance. His last helper left to get married last month. A newspaper." Sophia couldn't hide her interest. She had always loved reading, writing, and current events, much to her mother's dismay. "It's not the San Francisco Chronicle," Edward warned. "Just a small weekly paper, mostly local news, some wire stories from back east, but Mr. Donovan is a decent man, and it's respectable work for a lady." By that afternoon, Sophia found herself standing in the cluttered office of the Silver Creek Chronicle, facing Patrick Donovan, a man in his 50s with ink-stained fingers and a thoughtful expression. "I need someone who can write clearly, handle correspondence, and occasionally help with the printing when deadlines loom," he explained after Edward made the introductions. "The hours can be irregular, especially when news breaks, and the pay isn't grand $12 a week." It was far less than Sophia had ever imagined earning, but it was a start. "I'm an excellent writer, Mr. Donovan, and I learn quickly. I don't have experience with printing presses, but I'm willing to learn whatever is necessary." He regarded her skeptically. "Forgive my bluntness, Miss Montgomery, but you don't look like someone accustomed to hard work. Those hands haven't seen much beyond embroidery, I'd wager." Sophia fought back a flash of irritation. "Perhaps not, but they're capable of more. I'm not afraid of ink stains or long hours, Mr. Donovan." Something in her determination must have convinced him, for he nodded slowly. "A week's trial, then, starting tomorrow, 8 o'clock sharp." That evening at the boarding house dining table, Sophia shared her news with Miss Wells and Mrs. Jenkins. "The newspaper, how exciting," Miss Wells said. "Though I imagine Mr. Donovan can be quite demanding," Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "He's fair, though. My Henry always said Donovan was one of the few men in town who stood by his principles, even when it wasn't popular." "It's just a trial week," Sophia reminded them, not wanting to seem too confident. "Well, you'll need suitable work dresses," Mrs. Jenkins observed, eyeing Sophia's attire. "Those fine fabrics won't stand up to printing ink. I could alter some of my ready-made stock for you at a reasonable price." Sophia accepted gratefully, aware that her current wardrobe was entirely unsuitable for her new circumstances. Later, lying in bed, she penned a brief letter to Mrs. Peterson, letting her know she had arrived safely and found employment. She debated writing to her parents but decided against it. The wound of her departure was still too fresh. the hurt on both sides too raw. Her first week at the Chronicle proved even more challenging than anticipated. Mr. Donovan expected perfection in everything, from the headlines she composed to the way she organized incoming correspondence. The physical demands of helping with the printing press left her muscles aching in ways she had never experienced. But there was also exhilaration in the work, the rush to meet deadlines, the satisfaction of seeing her words in print, even if they were just brief notices about local events. For the first time in her life, Sophia felt useful, her efforts valued for their substance rather than their social acceptability. On her 6th day at the newspaper, as she was returning from delivering copies to the hotel, Sophia's attention was caught by a commotion near the livery stable. A man was struggling to control a magnificent chestnut horse that reared and bucked, clearly terrified by something. Without thinking, Sophia hurried closer, her voice instinctively dropping to the soothing tone she had used with her favorite mountback in San Francisco. "Easy there, easy now." The horse's ears flicked toward her, its wild eyes registering her presence. The man holding the lead rope glanced over, momentarily distracted. "Stay back, miss. This one's half wild." But Sophia had already seen the cause of the animal's distress, a piece of paper fluttering from a nearby crate, catching the breeze in a way that spooked the sensitive creature. Moving slowly but deliberately, she retrieved the paper, crumpling it and tucking it into her pocket. "There now," she murmured, keeping her distance but maintaining a calming presence. "That's better, isn't it?" Remarkably, the horse began to settle, its breathing still rapid but the dangerous rearing subsiding. The man holding the rope looked at Sophia with surprise and newfound respect. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl. "Seems he likes you better than me, and I've been trying to gentle him for a week." Sophia finally took proper notice of the man. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky, he wore the practical attire of a working cowboy, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a well-worn hat pushed back to reveal dark blonde hair. "He was frightened by the paper," she explained, pointing to her pocket where she'd stashed the offending item. "Horses can be skittish about unexpected movements. You know horses?" he asked, still keeping a cautious grip on the rope as the animal continued to calm. "I rode extensively back home," she admitted, realizing too late that this revelation might raise questions about her background, but the cowboy merely nodded. "Got a good eye, then. This one's been challenging. Name's Blake Sullivan, by the way. I manage the Triple S ranch outside town." "Sophia Montgomery." She hesitated, unsure of the proper social protocol in this situation. In San Francisco, they would never have been introduced without a mutual acquaintance present. "I work at the Chronicle, with old Donovan, rather you than me." His smile transformed his face, softening the weathered lines around his eyes. "He can be pricklier than a cactus. He's demanding but fair," Sophia found herself defending her employer, "and the work is interesting." Blake nodded, his attention divided between her and the horse, which had now calmed enough that he could stroke its neck. "Say, since you've got away with horses, maybe you'd like to see more of this fellow. I'm breaking him for Dr. Lewis needs a reliable mount for his medical calls." Before Sophia could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Miss Montgomery, those papers won't deliver themselves." Mr. Donovan stood in the doorway of the Chronicle office, his expression making it clear that socializing was not part of her job description. "I should go," she said apologetically to Blake. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Sullivan." "Blake," he corrected with another easy smile, "and thank you for your help, Miss Montgomery." "Sophia," she replied, surprising herself with the informality. Then, with a nod, she hurried back across the street, feeling Blake's gaze follow her until she reached the newspaper office. Mr. Donovan raised an eyebrow as she entered. "Making acquaintances already." "I was merely helping with a nervous horse," Sophia explained, feeling her cheeks warm slightly. "MMM." He didn't seem entirely convinced. Well, while you were assisting with equine matters, a letter arrived for you. He handed her an envelope bearing the unmistakable Montgomery family crest. Sophia's stomach dropped. Of course her parents would eventually track her to Silver Creek. She had left the name of the town with Mrs. Peterson in case of emergency, and while she trusted the older woman's discretion, her parents were resourceful. With trepidation, she opened the letter, prepared for recriminations or demands for her immediate return. Instead, she found a brief note from her brother Thomas. Sophia, mother and father are beside themselves. I urge you to reconsider this rash action. However, I understand your motivations better than you might think. Enclosed is a bank draft that should ease your immediate circumstances. Please write to let us know you are safe, even if you are not yet ready to return. Your concerned brother, Thomas. Attached was a bank draft for an amount that made Sophia's eyes widen. It was more than she would earn in 6 months at the Chronicle. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket alongside the crumpled paper that had frightened the horse. Thomas's gesture was kind, but accepting the money felt like acknowledging she couldn't succeed on her own, the very thing she had come west to disprove. That evening, she wrote a brief reply to her brother, thanking him for his concern but returning the bank draft. I need to make my own way, she explained. Please assure mother and father that I am safe and well situated. When I have proven to myself what I am capable of, perhaps then we can discuss reconciliation. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Sophia's trial period at the Chronicle extended into permanent employment. As Mr. Donovan grudgingly admitted, she had a talent for the work. She visited Abigail regularly as her cousin regained strength, and she became friendly with her fellow boarders, who helped her navigate the social customs of Silver Creek. She also encountered Blake Sullivan with increasing frequency. Sometimes it was at the general store, where they exchanged brief pleasantries. Other times, he would stop by the Chronicle office with notices about cattle sales or ranch matters that required publication. Each time, Sophia found herself looking forward to their next meeting with an anticipation that both thrilled and alarmed her. That Sullivan fellow seems to find a lot of reasons to place notices lately, Mr. Donovan remarked dryly one afternoon after Blake had departed. Curious, since the Triple S never advertised much before. Sophia busied herself with organizing papers to hide her blush. Perhaps they're expanding their operations. Perhaps, Mr. Donovan agreed, though his tone suggested he had a different theory entirely. 2 months after her arrival in Silver Creek, Sophia received an invitation that sent ripples of excitement and anxiety through her. The town was holding its annual Founders' Day celebration, culminating in a dance at the newly completed town hall. Miss Wells and Mrs. Jenkins immediately began discussions about appropriate attire. You'll need something special, Mrs. Jenkins declared. I have a lovely blue fabric that would suit your coloring perfectly. It's not a San Francisco ball, Sophia protested. Surely something simple would be more appropriate. Miss Wells laughed. This is the social event of the year in Silver Creek. Everyone makes an effort. And besides, she added with a knowing look, certain ranch managers are sure to attend. Sophia felt her face warm. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't, dear Mrs. Jenkins said, patting her hand. Just as you don't know why Blake Sullivan has taken to riding past the boarding house every morning just as we're sitting down to breakfast. Despite her embarrassment, Sophia allowed Mrs. Jenkins to create a new dress for the occasion simpler than what she would have worn in San Francisco, but still elegant in its own way. The blue fabric complemented her eyes, and the modest cut was nonetheless flattering to her figure. The evening of the dance arrived clear and pleasant, with a crescent moon hanging in the sky. Sophia walked to the town hall with Miss Wells and Mrs. Jenkins, her stomach fluttering with anticipation. Inside, the newly constructed building had been transformed with bunting, flowers, and lanterns. A small band played in one corner, and refreshment tables lined another wall. Sophia was immediately struck by how different this gathering was from the formal balls she had attended in San Francisco. Here, people of all social standings mingled freely. The mayor's wife chatted with the blacksmith's daughter, while the bank manager and a ranch hand discussed cattle prices over cups of punch. "Miss Montgomery, you look lovely this evening." She turned to find Edward Harrington approaching with Abigail on his arm. Her cousin had recovered enough to attend the celebration, though she still moved with careful deliberation. "Abigail, I'm so glad you felt well enough to come." Sophia embraced her cousin gently. "I wouldn't miss seeing you at your first Silver Creek social," Abigail replied with a smile. "And speaking of not missing things." She nodded toward the entrance where Blake Sullivan had just arrived. Sophia couldn't help but stare. Gone was the dusty ranch attire, replaced by a well-cut dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. His blonde hair was neatly combed, and he had clearly visited the barber recently. As he scanned the room, his eyes met hers, and a smile spread across his face. He made his way through the crowd, exchanging greetings with townspeople but clearly headed in her direction. Sophia felt her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the tight lacing of her corset. "Miss Montgomery," he said, tipping his head in a respectful nod. "You look beautiful tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, noting how different he looked when properly dressed. Not better. Necessarily, she had grown quite fond of his everyday ranch attire, but different in a way that reminded her he moved between worlds, just as she now did. "I believe this dance is beginning," he said as the band struck up a waltz. "Would you do me the honor?" "Go on," Abigail encouraged when Sophia hesitated. "Edward and I will find seats and watch the festivities for now." Taking Blake's offered arm, Sophia allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, and he guided her with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. "You dance well, Mr. Sullivan," she remarked as they moved in perfect time to the music. "Blake," he reminded her, "and you sound surprised." "Did you think cowboys only knew how to square dance?" she laughed. "I confess I didn't know what to expect. My experience with Western social events is limited." "Yes, I gathered you're not originally from these parts," he said, his blue eyes studying her with interest. "San Francisco, isn't it?" Sophia missed a step in surprise. "How did you know?" "Small towns have long memories and longer tongues," he replied without judgment. "Word gets around when a young lady from a prominent San Francisco family decides to make her home in Silver Creek." She tensed, wondering how much else he knew about her family's wealth, about her flight from an unwanted future. "Does everyone know?" "Not the details," he assured her as they continued to waltz. "Just that you're Edward Harrington's cousin-in-law and that you came from money back in California." Relief washed over her. "And does that matter to people here?" Blake considered her question seriously. "To some, perhaps. There are always those who judge based on background, but most folks around here care more about who you are now than who you were before." "And what about you, Blake Sullivan? Do you care about who I was before?" His eyes held hers steadily. "I care about the woman who calmed a frightened horse without hesitation, the one who works hard at the Chronicle despite Donovan's demanding ways. The one who visits her ailing cousin faithfully and has befriended half the town in the short time she's been here." His voice softened. "That's the Sophia Montgomery I've come to admire." The music ended before she could formulate a response to such heartfelt words. As custom dictated, Blake escorted her back to where Abigail and Edward sat, but not before asking, "Would you save another dance for me later?" "I would like that," Sophia replied, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the crowded room. As the evening progressed, Sophia danced with several partners: Edward, the young minister from the stagecoach, even Mr. Donovan, who proved surprisingly light on his feet for a man of his years. But it was the dances with Blake that made her heart flutter and brought color to her cheeks. During a break in the music, as Sophia stood by the refreshment table with Abigail, her cousin leaned close. He hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening, you know. Who? Sophia asked, though she knew perfectly well whom Abigail meant. Don't play coy. Blake Sullivan. Half the unmarried women in this room would give their best bonnet for the attention he's showing you. Abigail's eyes twinkled. And I dare say you're not entirely indifferent to him either. Before Sophia could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man stumbled in, his clothes dirty and torn, his face streaked with blood from a cut above his eye. "Raiders," he gasped as several men rushed to help him. "Hit the Peterson place, took everything they could carry. Peterson's hurt bad." The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly. The town's doctor pushed through the crowd, and several men, including Blake, gathered around the messenger for details. "Where's the sheriff?" someone called out. "Went to Denver yesterday," came the response. "Deputies out at the Jackson place investigating that missing cattle report." Blake's voice rose above the others. "We need to form a posse. Peterson needs medical attention, and those raiders need to be tracked before the trail goes cold." Within minutes, the celebration had transformed into an organized response to crisis. The doctor departed immediately for the Peterson ranch with 2 volunteers. Blake and several other men prepared to track the raiders, collecting weapons and supplies. As Blake headed for the door, Sophia hurried after him. "Be careful," she said, catching his arm. He turned, his expression softening briefly. "I will. These raiders have been hitting isolated homesteads for weeks. It's time someone put a stop to it. Just." She struggled to find the right words, unwilling to express the depth of her concern after knowing him such a short time. "Please come back safely." He touched her cheek lightly, the gesture both tender and reassuring. "Count on it." Then he was gone, along with a dozen other men who had volunteered for the posse. The remaining townspeople dispersed in subdued groups, the evening's joy replaced by concern for their neighbors and the men who had gone to help them. Edward insisted on escorting Sophia, Abigail, and the other boarding house residents home. As they walked through the now quiet streets, Sophia's thoughts remained with Blake and the dangers he might be facing. "He's experienced, Sophia," Abigail said gently, seeming to read her mind. "Blake knows this territory better than most. If anyone can track those raiders safely, it's him." "I barely know him," Sophia whispered. "Why does it feel as though my heart left with him tonight?" Abigail squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the heart recognizes what belongs to it before the mind has time to catch up." The next morning brought no news of the posse, and Sophia found it nearly impossible to concentrate on her work at the Chronicle. Mr. Donovan, himself distracted by concern for the community, finally set her to organizing the previous year's editions, a task that required minimal thought. "Go home early," he told her in the late afternoon. "You're of no use here today, and I need to prepare the special edition about the raid for tomorrow." Grateful for his understanding, Sophia left the office, but instead of heading directly to the boarding house, she found herself walking toward the church. She wasn't particularly religious. Her parents had attended services mainly for social appearances, but she felt drawn to the quiet sanctuary. The church was empty except for Reverend Thompson, who nodded respectfully as she slipped into a pew near the back. For several minutes, she sat in silence, trying to organize her thoughts and the unfamiliar emotions that had overtaken her since meeting Blake Sullivan. "May I join you, Miss Montgomery?" Sophia looked up to find Mrs. Peterson, Blake's neighbor, not the San Francisco friend who had helped with her deception, standing beside the pew. The older woman's face showed signs of recent trauma, with a bruise darkening one cheek. "Of course," Sophia moved to make room. "How is Mr. Peterson? Resting as comfortably as can be expected, thank the Lord," Mrs. Peterson replied. "The doctor says he'll recover, though it may take time." She studied Sophia's face. "You're worried about the men who went after those bandits." It wasn't a question, but Sophia nodded anyway. "It seems dangerous." "Life out here often is," Mrs. Peterson said matter-of-factly. "But we face those dangers together as a community. That's what makes it bearable." She patted Sophia's hand. Blake Sullivan is as capable as they come. My herald says there's not a better tracker in 3 counties. Sophia managed to smile. It seems everyone knows I'm concerned about him specifically. Small towns, Mrs. Peterson said with a shrug. Besides, the way he looked at you at the dance wasn't exactly subtle. Half the town was taking bets on when he'd get around to courting you properly. The thought that her growing feelings for Blake might be reciprocated with equal intensity both thrilled and terrified Sophia. In San Francisco, courtships proceeded along carefully prescribed lines, with proper introductions, chaperoned outings, and parental approval. Here in Silver Creek, it seemed the entire town had decided they were a match before they'd even properly acknowledged their feelings to each other. As if to underscore the point, Mrs. Peterson added, "He's a good man, Blake Sullivan. Honorable to his core, lost his parents young and built himself up from nothing. The Triple S was barely surviving when old man Stewart hired him 5 years ago. Now it's one of the most successful operations in the territory." Before Sophia could respond, the church door opened and Reverend Thompson hurried toward them. "They're back," he announced. "Just rode into town." Sophia's heart leaped. "Are they all right? Is anyone hurt?" "Some minor injuries," the Reverend replied. "They're gathering at the sheriff's office now." Propriety dictated that Sophia should wait patiently for news rather than rushing to the sheriff's office like some lovesick girl. But the rules of San Francisco society seemed increasingly irrelevant in Silver Creek. "Would you mind if she began, looking at Mrs. Peterson. The older woman smiled knowingly. "Go on, dear. I'd do the same if it were my herald." Sophia hurried through the streets, her pace just shy of running, until she reached the sheriff's office. A crowd had already gathered outside, making it difficult to see what was happening. She stood on tiptoe, trying to glimpse Blake among the returning men. "Sophia." Abigail's voice called from nearby. "Over here," her cousin stood with Edward at the edge of the crowd. As Sophia joined them, Abigail explained, "They caught up to the raiders at Cottonwood Creek. There was a shootout, but they recovered most of the stolen property." "And Blake?" Sophia couldn't keep the anxiety from her voice. Before Abigail could answer, the crowd parted, and the men began to emerge from the sheriff's office. Blake was among them, his face dirty and stubbled, a makeshift bandage around his left forearm. But he was walking under his own power, and the sight of him alive and mostly whole sent a wave of relief through Sophia so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. His eyes scanned the crowd until they found hers. Without hesitation, he made his way directly to where she stood. "You're hurt," she said, reaching toward his bandaged arm but stopping short of touching it. "Just a graze," he assured her. "Doc says it'll heal clean." For a moment they simply looked at each other, oblivious to the crowd around them. Then Blake spoke, his voice low and meant only for her. "Thinking of you got me through it. The thought of coming back to see your face again." Sophia's breath caught. In San Francisco, such a direct declaration would have been considered shockingly forward. Here, with the dust of the trail still on his clothes and the evidence of danger still wrapped around his arm, it seemed exactly right. "I prayed for your safe return," she admitted. A smile touched his lips. "Did you now?" "And here, I thought San Francisco society ladies were too sophisticated for prayer." "Perhaps I'm becoming less of a San Francisco lady and more of a Silver Creek woman," she replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a certainty. "I'd like to call on you properly, Sophia Montgomery, with your permission." Despite the public setting, despite the impropriety of such a conversation without prior introduction to her family, Sophia nodded. "I'd like that, Blake Sullivan." In that moment, surrounded by the people of her new community, with the man who had so unexpectedly captured her heart looking at her as though she were the most precious thing he'd ever seen, Sophia felt truly free for the first time in her life. The following Sunday, Blake arrived at the boarding house dressed in his best suit, his hair neatly combed, a small bouquet of wildflowers in hand. "Mrs. Timmons greeted him with a knowing smile and showed him to the front parlor, where Sophia waited, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. "These are for you," he said, presenting the flowers with a formality that seemed at odds with his usual easy manner. "I hope you like wildflowers. They're not as fancy as hothouse blooms, but they're perfect," Sophia assured him, burying her nose in the colorful assortment. "Much more interesting than roses or lilies, Mrs. Timmons provided a vase, and after the flowers were properly arranged, she announced, "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. Door stays open, mind you." Once they were alone as the boarding house rules allowed, Blake seemed to relax slightly. "I thought we might walk to the park by the creek if you'd like. It's a fine day." "I'd enjoy that," Sophia agreed. The town's small park was indeed lovely, with cottonwood trees providing dappled shade and the creek burbling peacefully along its edge. Several other couples and families were enjoying the pleasant weather, making it a perfectly respectable outing. As they walked side by side, Blake offered his arm, and Sophia took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his jacket. For a time they strolled in comfortable silence, but eventually Blake spoke. "I realize there's much we don't know about each other," he said, "and I'm not one for dancing around matters, so perhaps we could simply ask what we wish to know." Sophia appreciated his directness. "That seems sensible. Would you like to begin?" He nodded. "Why did you really leave San Francisco? The rumor is you were running from an unwanted marriage, but I'd rather hear the truth from you." She hesitated, wondering how much to reveal. But if they were to build something real between them, honesty seemed essential. "I was running, but not from a specific marriage, rather from a life that felt increasingly like a cage, my family." She sighed. "They're good people in many ways, but they couldn't accept me as I am. Every misstep, every social blunder was magnified until I was labeled an embarrassment, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved." Blake listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "And what were these terrible blunders that caused such concern?" "Clumsiness, for one," Sophia admitted with a small laugh. "I have a tendency to drop things at inopportune moments, questions about politics and business that ladies aren't supposed to ask, interests in books and newspapers rather than fashion and gossip." She shrugged. "Small things, really, but they added up to a daughter who simply couldn't conform to their expectations." "Their loss," Blake said simply. "Those sound like qualities to be valued, not suppressed." His easy acceptance warmed her heart. "Now my question. You mentioned building the Triple S from nearly nothing. How did that come about?" As they continued their walk, Blake told her about growing up on a small hardscrabble farm in Texas, losing both parents to fever when he was 16 and making his way north working cattle drives. His natural affinity for animals and instinctive understanding of land management had caught Samuel Steward's attention when Blake was working as a simple ranch hand. Old man Steward had no sons, just a daughter who'd married and moved east. "He took a chance on me, made me foreman when I was barely 22. When his health started failing, he gave me the opportunity to buy in as a partner." Blake's pride in what he'd accomplished was evident, but without arrogance. "When he passed 3 years ago, he left his remaining share to me, provided I keep the Triple S name and continue employing the men who'd been loyal to him." "That's remarkable," Sophia said, genuinely impressed. "You've accomplished so much." "It's not a banking fortune," he said, giving her a sidelong glance to gauge her reaction. "But it's solid. The ranch turns a good profit, and I've been saving to build a proper house to replace the cabin I've been living in." Sophia realized he was telling her, in his straightforward way, that he could provide for a family for her, if things between them progressed as they both seemed to hope. The thought sent a pleasurable shiver through her. Their conversation continued as they completed their circuit of the park, each sharing pieces of their past, their hopes, their preferences in simple things like food and music and books. By the time Blake escorted her back to the boarding house, Sophia felt as though she'd known him for years rather than months. At the door, he took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "May I call on you again next Sunday?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied honestly. He smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. "Until then, Miss Montgomery." As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him, "Blake, thank you for today, for listening, for understanding." He tipped his hat, his blue eyes warm. "Thank you for trusting me with your story." Over the weeks that followed, their courtship became the talk of Silver Creek. Blake called faithfully each Sunday, taking Sophia for walks, to church services, and occasionally to dinner at the hotel restaurant. When Abigail recovered enough to host small gatherings, Blake was included among the guests, seamlessly fitting into Sophia's small circle of friends. At the Chronicle, Mr. Donovan grudgingly adjusted to Sophia's regular absences on Sundays, though he occasionally made dry remarks about ranch managers who couldn't find better uses for their time than monopolizing valuable employees. 4 months after their first meeting, Blake invited Sophia to visit the Triple S Ranch. Mrs. Jenkins agreed to accompany her as a chaperone, preserving the proprieties that, while less rigid than in San Francisco, were still observed in Silver Creek. The ranch sprawled across rolling hills dotted with grazing cattle, the main buildings clustered near a stand of cottonwoods that provided welcome shade. Blake's cabin, while small, was neat and well-maintained, with a covered porch and a corral nearby where several horses, including the chestnut Sophia had helped calm, grazed contentedly. "It's beautiful," Sophia said as Blake helped her down from the wagon. "So peaceful." "Over there," Blake pointed to a rise overlooking a bend in the creek, "is where I'm planning to build the main house. Better views, good drainage, and close enough to the existing buildings to be practical." As he showed them around the property, Sophia could see why he loved it so deeply. The Triple S represented not just his livelihood but his identity, a physical manifestation of everything he had worked for and believed in. When they reached the corral, the chestnut horse approached, nickering softly at Sophia's presence. "He remembers you," Blake said, obviously pleased. "Smartest horse I've ever trained. Doc Lewis is delighted with him." "Does he have a name?" Sophia asked, stroking the animal's velvety nose, copper for his coloring, simple but it suits him. Mrs. Jenkins, who had been maintaining a discreet distance during their tour, called from the porch where she had settled with some mending. "The light will be failing soon. We should start back before too long." Blake nodded acknowledgement, then turned to Sophia. "There's one more thing I'd like to show you, if you don't mind a short ride." With Mrs. Jenkins' reluctant permission, not too far and back before dusk, Blake saddled 2 horses. He helped Sophia mount a gentle mare, then led the way across a meadow toward the rise he had pointed out earlier. When they reached the top, Sophia gasped. The view was even more spectacular than she had imagined, with the creek winding silver through green pastures, the distant mountains purple in the late afternoon light. "Now you can see why I chose this spot," Blake said, dismounting and helping her down. "On clear days, you can see all the way to the north pasture." Sophia turned slowly, taking in the panoramic vista. "It's perfect for a home." "I'm glad you think so." Blake's voice had softened, a hint of vulnerability creeping in, "because I was hoping. That is, I wanted to ask." She turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing as she realized what might be coming. Blake took a deep breath, then reached for her hands. "Sophia Montgomery, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I know our acquaintance has been brief by some standards, but out here, we learn to recognize what's genuine and hold on to it." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I love you. Your intelligence, your courage in starting over, your kindness to everyone you meet. Even your occasional clumsiness, which I find endearing rather than embarrassing." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes at his words, so different from the criticism she had known for most of her life. "I'm not a sophisticated man," Blake continued. "I can't offer you the kind of society life you knew in San Francisco, but I can promise to cherish you exactly as you are, to build a life with you here if you'll have me." He squeezed her hands gently. "Sophia, will you marry me?" Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unstoppable. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Blake Sullivan, I will marry you." His face transformed with happiness, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that made her laugh aloud. When he set her down, his expression turned serious again. "I know your family isn't here, and that might be difficult for you. If you want to wait to write to them," Sophia shook her head. "My family made their choice when they decided I was an embarrassment rather than a daughter to be proud of. You've chosen to love me as I am. That's the family I want to build my future with." Blake cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Not to me," he said softly. "You could never be an embarrassment to me." And then he kissed her, a kiss that held all the promise of the life they would build together, a life where Sophia would finally be free to be herself, loved not despite her differences, but because of them. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in Silver Creek's church, with Reverend Thompson officiating. The entire town seemed to attend, filling the simple building to capacity. Abigail stood as Sophia's maid of honor, while Blake's foreman, Sam Winters, served as best man. Sophia wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Jenkins had labored over for weeks, with a veil of delicate lace that had been Abigail's contribution. Blake looked handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit ordered specially from Denver. As Sophia walked down the aisle on Edward's arm, the closest thing to family she had present, she felt none of the anxiety that had plagued social occasions in her previous life. This moment, this commitment, felt right in a way nothing ever had before. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with traditional vows that resonated deeply as Blake and Sophia pledged themselves to one another. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Blake's kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience but still conveying his joy. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, featured abundant food, music, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As was tradition, Blake and Sophia opened the dancing with a waltz, moving together with the easy synchronicity they had discovered at the Founders' Day dance. "Happy Mrs. Sullivan," Blake murmured as they circled the floor. "Completely," Sophia replied, still marveling at her new name, her new identity. "Though I'm a bit nervous about the house. I've never managed a household before, especially not a ranch. We'll learn together," he assured her. "And the cabin is comfortable enough until the new house is completed." Blake had begun construction on their home immediately after their engagement, employing the best builders in the county to work through the autumn months. Though it wouldn't be fully completed until spring, the main structure was sound enough for winter occupancy. As the evening progressed, Mr. Donovan approached to offer his congratulations, his usual gruff manner softened by the festive occasion and perhaps by the whiskey that had flowed freely. "You've done well for yourself, Miss Montgomery, Mrs. Sullivan, that is," he corrected himself, "though the Chronicle will be the poorer without you." "I've arranged for my replacement," Sophia reminded him. "Miss Carter is very capable." "Not the same," Donovan grumbled. "But I suppose I can't compete with true love and a cattle empire." Blake, who had joined them, laughed. "Hardly an empire, Mr. Donovan, but we would be honored if you'd visit us at the ranch once we're settled." The older man harumphed but seemed pleased by the invitation. "Perhaps I will. Someone needs to make sure this young lady doesn't forget her literary talents amid all that beef and barley." Later, as Sophia was speaking with Mrs. Timmons and some of the other boarding house residents, Abigail pulled her aside. "A letter arrived for you yesterday," she said quietly, pressing an envelope into Sophia's hand. "I didn't want to give it to you before the ceremony in case it upset you." Sophia recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. "Thank you," she said, tucking the letter into her pocket. "I'll read it later." "Whatever it says," Abigail advised, "remember that today is about your future, not your past." The wisdom of that counsel stayed with Sophia as the celebration continued. It was nearly midnight when she and Blake finally departed for the ranch amid cheers and well wishes from their friends and neighbors. The cabin, which had seemed simply functional during her previous visit, had been transformed. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers stood on the table, all touches added by the ranch hands' wives to welcome the new bride. "It's not what you're used to," Blake said as he carried her across the threshold, following tradition. "But it's home until spring." "It's perfect," Sophia assured him, meaning it. The small space was warm, clean, and filled with evidence of care both Blake's and the community that had embraced her. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, the intimacies of marriage discovered with tender patience on both sides, Sophia remembered the letter in her pocket. While Blake slept beside her, she carefully extracted it, moving to the window where moonlight provided just enough illumination to read. "My dear Sophia," her mother had written, "your brother has informed us of your impending marriage. While your father and I remain deeply hurt by your departure and the manner in which you chose to leave, we cannot help but wish for your happiness. Perhaps in time we may come to understand the path you have chosen. Until then, please know that despite everything, you remain in our thoughts. Your mother, Sophia Montgomery." No mention of Blake by name, no congratulations on her marriage, no suggestion of reconciliation, and yet it was more than Sophia had expected. An acknowledgement, at least, that the bonds of family, while strained, were not entirely broken. She folded the letter carefully and returned to bed, curling against Blake's warmth. Tomorrow would be the first day of their married life together. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments of frustration alongside the joy. But for the first time in her life, Sophia felt completely accepted for who she was, embarking on a future she had chosen rather than one prescribed for her. As she drifted toward sleep, Blake's arm settled around her, pulling her closer. "Everything all right," he murmured, half awake. "Everything is perfect," she whispered back. And in that moment, it truly was. The first year of marriage brought exactly the challenges and joys Sophia had anticipated. Learning to manage a ranch household required skills her San Francisco upbringing hadn't provided, but she approached each new task with determination and humor. Blake proved a patient teacher, never criticizing her mistakes, but helping her learn from them. The house on the hill was completed as spring turned to summer, a sturdy two-story structure with wide windows to capture the magnificent views. Sophia took great pleasure in making it a home, combining practical frontier necessities with a few carefully chosen beautiful items, some ordered from Denver, others crafted by local artisans. She continued to write, contributing occasional articles to the Chronicle and corresponding regularly with Abigail and her friends in town. Though she missed certain aspects of her work at the newspaper, the ranch provided new interests and responsibilities that kept her mind engaged. Blake's business prospered, allowing them to hire additional hands and expand the operation. Sophia learned to ride alongside him, checking fence lines and moving cattle, her skills improving until she could handle most ranch tasks with confidence. Her natural affinity for horses proved especially valuable, and Blake often joked that the animals listened to her better than to him. In town, they were accepted as a couple who complemented each other perfectly, her refinement and intellect balancing his practical nature and quiet strength. If anyone had initially doubted the match between the San Francisco socialite and the ranch manager, those doubts quickly evaporated in the face of their obvious happiness. Letters continued to arrive occasionally from San Francisco, mostly from Thomas, with brief notes from her mother enclosed. Her father remained silent. Sophia responded with carefully worded updates about her life, extending tentative olive branches without compromising her pride or her choices. As their first anniversary approached, Sophia discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought Blake to his knees beside her chair, his face alight with wonder as he pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. He looked up at her, his blue eyes suspiciously bright. "More than I can say. Are you happy, Sophia? Truly happy with this life we've made?" She stroked his cheek, this man who had seen her value when her own family couldn't. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. The ranch hands built a cradle of polished pine, while Mrs. Jenkins and the other town women organized a quilting bee to create blankets for the coming baby. Dr. Lewis visited regularly to check on Sophia's progress, pronouncing her healthy and the pregnancy proceeding normally. As her time grew near, Sophia found herself thinking more often of her parents. Despite everything, she wished they could know their grandchild. After discussing it with Blake, she wrote a letter to her mother, announcing the expected birth and extending a cautious invitation for them to visit when they felt ready. The response came more quickly than she had anticipated. A telegram arrived just 2 weeks before her due date. Arriving Denver October 15, stop required directions to Silver Creek, stop mother and father Montgomery. "They're coming," Sophia told Blake, her voice unsteady with emotion. "Both of them." He took her hands in his. "Are you ready for this?" "It doesn't have to happen now, not with the baby so close." She shook her head. "No, it's time. I want them to see who I've become, the life we've built. And I want our child to know their grandparents if that's possible." Blake arranged for Edward to meet her parents in Denver and escort them to Silver Creek. The morning of their expected arrival, Sophia moved restlessly around the house, adjusting flowers, straightening cushions, checking and rechecking the guest room preparations. "They won't care about the house," Blake said gently, catching her hands as she reached to rearrange a vase of late roses for the third time. "They're coming to see you." "I know," she sighed. "I just want everything to be perfect." "It already is," he assured her. "Our home, our life, our family. Remember that, whatever happens today." The sound of an approaching buggy sent Sophia to the window. Edward was driving, with 2 figures seated behind him, her parents, coming up the hill to the house she and Blake had built together. "They're here," she whispered, suddenly overcome with nervousness. Blake squeezed her hand. "I'm right beside you." They stepped onto the porch together, Sophia's advanced pregnancy making her movements deliberate. As the buggy stopped and Edward helped her parents descend, she studied their faces, looking for signs of the 2 years that had passed since she'd last seen them. Her father appeared older, his hair now completely gray, his posture slightly less rigid than she remembered. Her mother seemed essentially unchanged, elegantly dressed as always, her expression carefully composed. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sophia stepped forward, one hand supporting her rounded belly. "Mother, father, welcome to our home." Her mother's composure cracked first. "Sophia," she said, her voice breaking slightly as her gaze fell to her daughter's pregnant form. "You look enormous," Sophia suggested with a small smile. "Beautiful," her mother finished, surprising her. "You look beautiful." Richard Montgomery cleared his throat. "The house is impressive," he said stiffly, looking past Sophia to the structure behind her. "Solid construction." "Thank you, sir," Blake said, stepping forward and offering his hand. "Blake Sullivan, I'm honored to finally meet Sophia's parents." After a slight hesitation, her father shook Blake's hand. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand you manage a successful cattle operation." "Own and manage," Blake corrected mildly. "The Triple S Ranch, but please come inside. The afternoon air has a chill." As they entered the house, Sophia watched her parents taking everything in the comfortable furnishings, the evidence of prosperity achieved through hard work rather than inheritance, the touches that reflected both her tastes and Blake's practicality. "It's lovely," her mother said and appeared to mean it. "So different from what I imagined." "What did you imagine, Mother?" Sophia asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor Montgomery's cheeks colored slightly. "Something more primitive, I suppose." "When you wrote of ranch life, I pictured something far less comfortable." The West isn't as wild as Eastern newspapers might suggest, Blake said diplomatically, though we have our challenges. Edward excused himself, promising to return the next day, leaving the family to become acquainted in private. Blake showed Richard around the property while Sophia and her mother remained in the house, the conversation tentative at first but gradually warming as they found safer topics than their painful parting. "Thomas sends his love," Elinor said as they sat in the parlor, tea service between them. "He wanted to come but couldn't leave the bank just now." "I've appreciated his letters," Sophia replied, "and yours when they came." Her mother set down her teacup with perfect steadiness. "Your father found it difficult. Your departure hurt his pride as much as his heart. But when we received your letter about the baby, he was the one who insisted we come." Sophia's surprise must have shown on her face, for her mother added, "He's changed, Sophia. We both have. Losing you forced us to examine ourselves in ways we never had before." Before Sophia could respond, she felt a sharp pain tighten across her abdomen. She gasped, one hand flying to her stomach. "Sophia," her mother's voice sharpened with concern. "I'm fine," Sophia assured her as the pain subsided. "The baby has been active today, probably the excitement." But when a second pain followed 20 minutes later, and a third not long after, Dr. Lewis was summoned. He confirmed what Sophia had begun to suspect: her labor had started, several days earlier than expected. "Your parents' arrival might have hastened things a bit," he explained after examining her. "Excitement and emotion can sometimes trigger labor in a fully termed pregnancy." Blake, who had returned with her father just as the doctor was arriving, took charge immediately. "What do we need to do?" "First labors typically progress slowly," Dr. Lewis assured them. "Make her comfortable, keep track of the contractions, and send for me when they're coming regularly, about 5 minutes apart." The hours that followed created an unexpected bond between the assembled family. Blake remained steadfastly at Sophia's side, helping her walk when movement eased the discomfort, supporting her through increasingly intense contractions. Her father paced the hallway, occasionally peering in with concern etched on his features. And most surprisingly, her mother transformed into a capable assistant, applying cool cloths to Sophia's forehead, offering sips of water, and sharing her own experience of childbirth. "You were stubborn even then," Elinor told her as the labor intensified toward evening. "Nearly 2 days you kept me waiting." "I hope this little one is less determined to make an entrance," Sophia gasped as another contraction gripped her. By midnight, the contractions were coming regularly, and Dr. Lewis was summoned again. He arrived with his wife, who often assisted him with deliveries. "The men should wait downstairs," Mrs. Lewis suggested tactfully. Blake looked to Sophia for direction. "Whatever you want," he said, holding her hand tightly. "Stay," she whispered. "Please stay with me." So he did, defying convention to remain at the head of the bed, supporting her shoulders, murmuring encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. Her mother stayed as well, working alongside Mrs. Lewis to follow the doctor's instructions. Shortly before dawn, with a final tremendous effort, Sophia delivered a healthy daughter whose lusty cries filled the room with joy. As Dr. Lewis placed the swaddled infant in her arms, Sophia looked up at Blake, whose face reflected all the wonder and love she felt. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's downy head. "What will you name her?" Elinor asked, her own eyes wet with tears as she gazed at her grandchild. Sophia and Blake exchanged a look of agreement. They had discussed names for months, considering family traditions from both sides. "Elinor Abigail Sullivan," Sophia said softly, after her grandmother's. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, a small sound of surprise escaping her. "Truly, if that's acceptable," Blake added. "It's more than acceptable," Elinor managed, visibly moved. "It's an honor I'm not certain I deserve." Richard Montgomery, who had been summoned once the baby was safely delivered, stood in the doorway, his usual composure shaken by the tableau before him. "She's beautiful," he he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Like her mother. The simple words, so unlike the criticism Sophia had grown accustomed to hearing from him, brought fresh tears to her eyes. Would you like to hold your granddaughter, father? With uncharacteristic hesitation, Richard approached the bed. When the tiny bundle was placed in his arms, his expression softened in a way Sophia had rarely seen. Hello, little Eleanor, he said quietly. Welcome to the world. In that moment, watching her father cradle her daughter with such gentle care, Sophia felt the last lingering wounds of her departure begin to heal. They would never fully agree on the choices she had made, but perhaps they could forge a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than expectation. As dawn broke over the Triple S Ranch, painting the mountains gold and pink, the expanded Sullivan family shared their first morning together. The distance between San Francisco and Silver Creek seemed less insurmountable, the differences in their lives less defining than the blood and love that connected them. We have something for the baby, Richard said later that day, presenting a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, clearly an heirloom. It belonged to my mother. I'd like our granddaughter to have it. Thank you, Sophia said, genuinely touched by the gesture. We'll keep it for her until she's old enough. Over the next week, as Sophia recovered and baby Eleanor settled into her new world, the barriers between the Montgomerys and Sullivans continued to lower. Richard accompanied Blake on his morning rounds, showing genuine interest in the operation of the ranch. Eleanor helped with the baby, sharing wisdom from her own experience of motherhood and gradually relaxing her formal mannerisms. On their final evening before returning to San Francisco, Richard requested a private word with Sophia. They sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in brilliant colors. I owe you an apology, he said finally. Your mother and I, we were wrong to treat you as we did. To make you feel as though you were somehow deficient because you didn't fit the mold we had imagined for you. Sophia's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you for saying that, Father. Seeing you here, with Blake and the baby, running this household with such competence, he paused, searching for words. You found where you belong, Sophia. And I'm proud of the woman you've become, even if I don't fully understand the path you chose to get here. That means more to me than I can express, she said softly. He nodded, still uncomfortable with emotional displays but making the effort. We'd like to visit again if that would be acceptable. And perhaps when little Eleanor is older and traveling is easier, you might consider visiting San Francisco. On your terms, he added quickly. No expectations, no demands. I'd like that, Sophia agreed. I want Eleanor to know both sides of her heritage. As twilight deepened around them, father and daughter sat in companionable silence, the distance between them not entirely bridged but spanned by a new understanding. The Montgomerys departed the next morning, promising to write and to visit again in the spring. As the buggy disappeared down the road, Blake put his arm around Sophia, baby Eleanor cradled in her other arm. All right, he asked simply. Sophia nodded, leaning into his strength. Better than all right. I never imagined they could change, that we could find a way back to each other without me becoming someone I'm not. People can surprise you, Blake said. Especially when love is involved. Looking up at the home they had built together literally and figuratively, Sophia felt a sense of completion. 2 years ago, she had fled San Francisco feeling like an embarrassment, a failure who couldn't conform to her family's expectations. Now she stood on her own land, with her husband beside her and their daughter in her arms, confident in who she was and the life she had chosen. Not to me, Blake had said on that hill when he proposed. You could never be an embarrassment to me. Those words had begun the healing of wounds inflicted over years of criticism. And now, as she gazed at her sleeping daughters face a perfect blend of Sullivan and Montgomery features, Sophia made a silent promise. This child would always know she was valued exactly as she was, with all her unique qualities celebrated rather than suppressed. What are you thinking? Blake asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sophia smiled up at him, her heart full of gratitude for the man who had seen her worth when she most needed to be seen. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most difficult journeys lead to exactly where we're meant to be," he nodded, understanding as he always did. "And that embarrassments sometimes turn out to be the greatest blessings." Together, they turned toward the house, toward their future, the family they had created between them, more precious than any social standing or inherited wealth could ever be.